From my perspective, I think it's about just reminding yourself that consciousness, that thoughtfulness, that those values come from all kinds of people and from all walks of life, not people who share your political views, not people who share your religious views. It can come from anywhere and from anyone. And I think we have this tendency, and it's exacerbated now, I think, because of social media, because of the polarization of our society at the moment. It's easy to forget that we can share those values with lots of people, even if we disagree on other things. So maintaining that level, I think, of objectivity is really important, and something that I have to remind myself about.
Hello, my name is Soyini Koch, and I want us to take a journey together. There's a movement in business. Some call it stakeholder capitalism. Others call it purpose-led business. Others profits through purpose or going beyond profits. Or we like to call it conscious capitalism. Regardless of what you like to call it, there are business leaders all around the world committing to and doing their very best to use the power that they have for good and not for evil. So I want you to join me in learning how to do this conscious capitalism thing better and better, one conversation at a time. Welcome to Capitalism Done Right, brought to you by CEO Exclusive and Conscious Capitalism Atlanta. In the episode you're about to hear in a moment, I talk with Kathryn Petralia, who co-founded Kabbage, which grew along conscious business lines and sold to American Express in 2020 for an estimated $850 million. She's since moved on to co-found Keep, and she sits on the board of Atticus LeBlanc's company, my second guest, PadSplit, which helps people rent rooms on an affordable short-term basis, thereby helping to solve some of the housing crisis here in Atlanta. So notice the stakeholder relationship here, and also notice two conscious leaders whose stories are very revealing about how they're using their businesses to create a very positive impact. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Capitalism Done Right. I am really thrilled to have with me this morning Kathryn Petralia, co-founder of Keep, and Atticus LeBlanc, founder and CEO of PadSplit. Both are really big supporters in the conscious capitalism movement here in Atlanta. And I've been eagerly waiting to have this conversation with both of you. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
So where I'd like to start is to have both of you weigh in on your journey as conscious leaders. How did you come into this perspective and point of view on how to run your businesses? And why is it important to you? Why do you think it matters?
I think it's something that evolves over time. I don't think when we started, our last company was called Kabbage. And I think when we started it, we didn't say, we want to be conscious about things. We want to do the right thing for our employees and for our community and for our customers. It just worked out that way. That was a better way to run a business. It was a better way to maintain engagement with employees. It was a better way to maintain engagement with customers and to build the products that they needed.
And I think for me, it all starts with a personal journey. But for me, it was, how do I create a sustainable lifestyle for myself and my family that is founded on my own perspectives and beliefs and just something that I can get up and be happy about doing every day. And over time, that evolves into, I think everyone else should have that as well. So if you're creating an organization that is scalable in any way and going to be sustainable over time, I think a lot of those things have to be true for your employees and your staff. And you have to have a mission that people are excited about getting up and giving their time towards. So it's absolutely an evolution for me. It's been 17 years in the making, but you learn a little bit more every day.
Yeah. And one of the things that I would love for you both to weigh in on, just to pick up on Kathryn's point, is longitudinal studies are done of companies that try to do this, like the cohort from Good to Great, or there's another cohort in a book called Enlightened Capitalists, or even some other cohorts that I've looked at. The data is actually really noisy on whether or not this leads to better financial outcomes. So, Kathryn, you said that you saw for yourself that it's actually a better way to do business. Unpack that for us a little bit. And one of the key themes that we want to drive in Capitalism Done Right is, how do you get it to actually make more money and why do some companies seem to be able to make more money leading from conscious business principles and some don't perform as well using them? And I'd love for you both to weigh in on that.
Yeah, so I think at its core, a business is made up of people. And if you believe, as I think most people do, that the business is people and ultimately is dependent on your ability to attract and retain talent, I firmly believe that the reason that we have been able to attract the talent that we have is because we are a mission-driven entity and because you are attracting people who are extremely enthusiastic about pursuing those mission-aligned objectives, and it is fulfilling for them personally. And one of the things that I'm proudest of at PadSplit is I feel like our culture is one that is very authentic, but the headlines don't make it authentic. And so as you're comparing across different companies, you can state that you are a mission-oriented company or that you are striving to be the greater good or striving for the greater good. I forget what the line in the show Silicon Valley was, but I think it was like every single pitch had to make the world a better place. And so to some degree, you can absolutely make it a tagline and I think deliver inconsistent results. It's a different process to take that singular vision, ingrain it into your core, and ensure that every business decision you make stems from whatever that singular purpose actually is. And if I were to venture a guess, I haven't looked at the data either, there's probably a pretty stark line between where that purpose is truly ingrained and used as a razor to make a decision or not, and the willingness of very talented individuals to verify that authenticity and to commit themselves to that purpose versus understanding, this is another to make the world a better place type of deal and not getting those same consistent results. That'd be my guess.
Like Atticus, I think it has to be structurally ingrained in the organization. You can't just staple it on later and say, oh, we want to be this way because employees might like it. We might be able to hire them. It actually, for us, it was part of our interview process. Rob and I interviewed almost everyone who ever worked for us at our last company, Cabbage. And we had about 600 people pre-pandemic. And it was a lot of effort, but what was great about it is we got to know everyone and we were able to make sure that the people we brought in cared about each other. They cared about people, but it wasn't that they were like us. Most people weren't like us, fortunately, but it was more that they did care about their community and they cared about their colleagues and they were self-aware and they wanted to participate in that environment. And that was important and special to them. And I mean, I see that play out day after day. And I've been gone from Cabbage since May. And I'm still, when somebody has a problem, people who have been gone from the company for 5 years are still reaching out to help their colleagues. And I think when you have that kind of environment, it necessarily spreads to customers. It necessarily spreads to investors, to the community, to all those other places. But as Atticus said, it starts with people.
I totally agree with that, Kathryn. Just to segue, organically, we kind of arrived at these guiding principles for care, show it, prove it.
Care, show it, prove it.
Exactly. But I think, again, it wasn't planned out. It was more organic. And I think it is as simple as Kathryn stated. It's just, you want to find someone who cares. And naturally, some people care more about certain initiatives or missions than others, but just caring about the person next to you or the customer that you're serving. And if you don't, if you're not conscious, forgive me, about what it is that you're spending your time, your most valuable asset doing, then you're not going to add a heck of a lot of value to the purpose, to the company. And it's going to be a lot less fun for everyone else around you.
So as we think about other companies who may not have incorporated these principles organically, but now are trying to maybe paste it on, or trying to maybe let's go with the people who are authentically trying to embrace conscious principles after the company has reached some scale. What are some of the things that you have successfully done to kind of structurally, both of you pointed to like structural initiatives to actually get conscious business principles to be a part of the fiber of the company? What are some of those things that could be done?
It's easier for me because I'm in the thick of it, in that we have all hands every Wednesday. And at the beginning of every all hands meeting, we run through our purpose, our vision, those guiding principles, and then our core values that we expect employees to demonstrate in everything that they do. It's the values that we recruit on, or that we hire, fire, promote on as well. And I ask a volunteer, sometimes it's a voluntel, but usually a volunteer at the beginning of the call to remind us what exactly it is that we're doing here. And so that's something that the first couple times was really socially awkward, but over time, I mean, I don't know how many all hands meetings we've had at this point, but it's been a lot. And lo and behold, generally everyone, even if they haven't gotten them memorized to the T, still has a really good idea of what it is that they are doing here and what it is that we are trying to achieve. So it's hard not to understand and embrace those principles and purpose.
We did something similar at our town hall where we would give Thinking Right awards. And it was actually that phrase, Thinking Right, was actually a very early investor of ours who had just made a comment. He's like, man, that person, they just think right. And we're like, oh, we like that. And so we had core values as well that went along with Thinking Right. And it was a peer nominated award. So you would nominate someone else for the award. And when you won, you get this little cube thingy that went at your desk, and but you had to associate it with one of our core values, like caring deeply or going above and beyond, or there were 5 of them and I'm embarrassed that I can't remember them all, so how quickly we forget things. But anyway, especially at my age, I think I have a good excuse now. So it was really neat that people would do that for one another, and it had to mimic one of the values. It couldn't be like, oh, this person did their job. But it had to be something that was, more than what they would normally do. So encouraging people to think outside of their day-to-day deliverables, I think, was really important for us.
And also perspicacity, Kathryn.
My favorite word, perspicacity. It's just fun to say.
Is that a real word that I just did this, or I have to look it up?
Word.
There's a little background here in that I interviewed Kathryn for one of our all hands meetings. And when we were talking about what it is, if there were one thing that we could hire for, that we look for in people that we hire, what is it? And I am not nearly as literary as Kathryn. And I would always say the ability to make independent judgment decisions. And Kathryn's word was, I want to find someone who's perspicacious. So of course I had to ask her in front of our 120 employees at the time. Like
I'm doing now.
Yeah. What does that mean? And effectively it is the same thing. The same thing, just in a much more concise description.
So that's the word of the day, perspicacious. I would like to go back to a point that you raised a few minutes ago, Atticus, about enthusiasm, because I certainly have noticed that when you tie the business's higher purpose to the person's individual higher purpose, even if they're not consciously aware of it, it unleashes this enthusiasm, right? And unleashes a tremendous amount of energy. And we can say that, but I'm wondering if you have a thought on where that would be quantified in a business. If we tried to quantify it, where on a P&L, for example, would you see that show up? And I know that's a tough question. I love tough questions, but yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know that you can. It would be really difficult to quantify in a P&L. I think you can qualify employee NPS, for instance, relatively easily. This kind of gets back to another principle that I feel like I've learned over time, which is that the closer you are to a problem, the easier it is to understand it, the more capable you are of solving it. If you're looking at a data tape or a P&L, for instance, it's not necessarily going to be apparent that, it's because they have a really group of enthusiastic employees. Whereas the closer you get to the organization, you may realize, man, people are really happy to be here, much more so than they have been at prior points in their career. And I think it, in some ways, the closer you get, it becomes really obvious too. And candidly, one of the major learnings that I had when I first started the company was just the difference in looking at someone's resume versus even just their, in some cases, written answers to application questions, where some of that enthusiasm comes through much more readily. Versus, this person appears on paper to be extremely qualified for this position. Whereas the reality was, as you went through the process, the person who showed up and did every bit of research on the company and was just thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you and was super mission aligned and ready to get in the weeds, that was ultimately a much better hire. And from a performance management standpoint, you could absolutely see that in the results. And so I would imagine that you could measure it over time in a P&L, but you'd have to really know what you were looking for, even though at the interview stage, it can be pretty obvious.
Kathryn, do you want to weigh in on that? Like, where would you find this, if I were trying to talk to private equity firm and say, you should invest in conscious businesses because you're going to get a better return. They're going to be like, well, prove it, right? Show me, prove it. What would you say?
I think it comes out, and this is not something that necessarily at a first glance a private equity investor might immediately value, but venture investors would, is retention. The fact that your employees stay longer because they're engaged and they're part of that. They share the values of the company. And the longer you have employees, it's just easier than bringing on new ones because there's expense associated with it and they become part of that fabric. And I think the other way you'd measure it is the way employees move throughout your organization, the ability to give them a career path over time so that people who, share those core values and are part of the core of your organization become the leaders of your company. And I think that's the best way to continue to deliver that message and to keep those values.
Awesome. So in closing, as we think about, I'd love to spend the rest of my life talking with you about this, which I will do. But
you get bored.
Yeah, which I will do, but not in this interview. Is as you think about the next, the evolution of where you want to grow in your own conscious leadership, what's next? What do you still feel like you have to learn? How do you want to move and continue to grow along these lines?
From my perspective, I think it's about just reminding yourself that consciousness, that thoughtfulness, that those values come from all kinds of people and from all walks of life, not people who share your political views, not people who share your religious views. It can come from anywhere and from anyone. And I think we have this tendency, and it's exacerbated now, I think, because of social media, because of the polarization of our society at the moment. It's easy to forget that we can share those values with lots of people, even if we disagree on other things. So maintaining that level, I think, of objectivity is really important and something that I have to remind myself about.
Me too. Atticus?
I think any founding journey is an evolution, and it is certainly an education. I have perhaps a somewhat, not necessarily contrarian view to a lot of folks, but I'm sure at least controversial in that I feel like the job of a founder or a successful founder is ultimately to peel off every layer of responsibility that you have and hand those to people who are infinitely more capable and likely enthused about doing those specific tasks than you are. Because if your job as a founder is to create a sustainable organization, and I certainly believe that it is. And for me, the reason why I started PadSplit was I wanted to create a sustainable legacy for good in the world. That means that my evolution has to continue to be peeling off those different responsibilities and as the curator, caretaker of the mission today, and figure out a way when, guess what? I'm going to die at some point that someone else inside the company or outside the company is attracted to that mission sufficiently that they can carry the torch forward. And that is a constant process of curation for me personally in making sure that, when I die, that carries through and that you have built something that truly can last. But at the end of the day, the faster that you can do that, it means that the easier it is for that mission to continue and another mission to begin, and that cycle continues. And so I think for me, that's a continuous learning process and understanding and being self-aware around what are those things that I do well? What are the things that I don't do well? Where does the organization need additional support to carry that through? And at the end of the day, how do you find someone who can sustain that mission, vision, purpose better than I can today?
How do both of you then? And then one thing that thing that founders struggle with is separating themselves from the business. Like they really do see that as like the core of who they are to some extent. And it feels like both of you have been successful in developing an identity that's separate from the businesses that you founded. And that's what allows you to separate your ego from the titles, from the job, and be willing to give it away to other people because your identity has been separated from it. Did you all struggle with that at all?
It's funny. I've never really thought about that. I think what you said is true, at least for me to a large degree. And perhaps a lot of it just has to do with where I was in life when I started the company and the reason I started the company. It wasn't so much for me or for my personal identity as much as that I wanted to leave something behind that was sustainable. And I knew that it couldn't always be me. And I think that's probably true for most of the things that I've started over the years. It's almost harder for me to think about it the other way. So I don't know if it's intuitive. I don't necessarily know, nor can I explain why that's the case, other than it was potentially a conscious decision early on that, again, I had this controversial view of what a founder is and what they should do and what is necessary in order for an organization to be sustainable and successful.
That I think that's very controversial, Atticus. I think because one person can't do everything. I mean, the whole idea is that you bring people in because one person doesn't scale. A group of people scales, but not one person. But the way you say it is a little controversial because I've heard you say it before. Like basically, I should be out of this job. Somebody else should be doing this job. Your goal is to work your way out of a job, basically. Which obviously that strikes some people in a funny way. Identity wise, I think for a long time, and even now to some degree, not even by choice, Cabbage, our last company, was a big part of my identity. And a lot of it was, I know I talk about the people a lot, but a lot of it was, being around and with all of those people that we hired and having that other family. I mean, your family is a part of your identity. Your grandparents, your uncles, your children, your nieces, your siblings, that's all part of your identity, where you grew up, all of those things. And so I don't think I can detach myself from Cabbage, but I physically did it because I left because the company bought us. And so it was a weird process, but it's really funny. I'm in my friend's office right now, across the street from the Cabbage building, which I'm staring at out of my window. So I didn't go very far. And you might argue that I haven't separated myself yet. And that may be true, but it's just convenient. I think you just, over time, you develop other interests and other activities, like my involvement with PadSplit or CARE, which is a global humanitarian organization that's also based in Atlanta. I'm on the board there. I think you just begin to do other things and get engaged in other areas that sort of draw some of your identity somewhere else, right?
Beautiful. And I thank you both very, very much. The point about family, I think, is people kind of have it in the background, but it's a theme that we'll pick up on in other shows, because that idea of the business as an extended family, I think, is something that we don't often talk about enough. So thank you very, very much. And we will continue to push the movement. Kathryn Petralia, co-founder of Keep, and Atticus LeBlanc, CEO and founder of PadSplit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, thanks for listening. I know you're super busy. So let's talk about how we can harvest some real learnings from this conversation that will make the investment of your time worthwhile. Atticus said that enthusiasm from his employees was the payoff from leading from a culture first, people first, conscious business mindset. Then when I asked about tangible financial metrics, he said, well, it's difficult to quantify. Well, I think we have to quantify it. And that's the whole reason for this show. We who want to spread this humanistic approach to running business, we have to prove that it actually works and leads to better financial outcomes. And the only way to do that is to measure it and then be able to show that to the market. I think that the way the enthusiasm that Atticus mentioned, and he is able to generate amongst his employees, and he actually is able to do it because, we can see the financial results of it. I think it translates certainly into retention, with Kathryn mentions, and we'll talk about that in later shows. Retention comes up a lot, but I want us to stay with the enthusiasm point here. Enthusiasm leads directly to discretionary effort. Discretionary effort is that term in business for when employees give you more work or value than you're paying them for. It's the staying a little bit late to do the job perfectly, or the extra attention paid to a customer, or the helping a fellow employee out to make sure that the team or the project succeeds. And according to the Harvard Business Review, it's worth about a 20% boost in individual employee performance. And I've seen estimates that go up to as much as like 57%. So wouldn't you love to inspire all your employees to give you 20% more? So give some thought to what actions you can take in your organization to then use what you've heard and use conscious capitalism to generate more enthusiasm, more discretionary effort amongst your employees. And if you want some ideas or some help in how to do that, well, there are a whole bunch of other business leaders trying to do this too. It's called Conscious Capitalism. So take a look at the Conscious Capitalism website, subscribe to our newsletter, and hopefully at some point come join us at an upcoming event like the CEO Summit. I want every CEO, business owner, and business leader running their business this way. So please rate and review this episode on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Send it to a friend or a colleague. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always very interested in your feedback and what you think. And unfortunately, I would love to spend forever with you, but that wraps up our time together today on Capitalism Done Right, brought to you by CEO Exclusive and Conscious Capitalism Atlanta. Until next time, please go out and do something amazing in the world with your business.